be studying Unit 1. Well, I'm going to see how far I can get through Unit 1, 2, and Unit 3 of VCE Accounting, that's Victoria curriculum. And I've never studied accounting before. It's the first time I'm looking through the material, so it'll be interesting. I'll try to narrate and commentate some of the most important landmarks and checkpoints. Try to follow along, have your stuff ready. In the initial stages of getting ready for studying, it's always important to make sure your environment is all set up, okay? So free of distractions, okay? What's your phone doing? Put your phone on silent, put it face down, chuck it on your bed, whatever you want to do. Have some water near you, so I've got my water here. If you need to go and get water or anything like that, do that now, there's time. Always worthwhile making sure that your setup is good. I haven't had lunch either, and I'm relatively sleep deprived, so I've got a bar here. Just keep me alive for the stream. You may want to do this a little bit differently. You may want to, have a separate thing where you're writing down everything as you're going, and then from that you can create your chunks and your mind maps and things. I'm actually just going to skip that step because I want to go a little bit faster. So I'll be trying to make my mind map a little bit as I go, and you'll just see how that works as well. And those of you that are on the later stages of the course, you'll know how to do this anyway. And if anyone happens to be watching this either now or in the future that's not on the course, you can find information about that in the description below the video as well. Cool. We'll get started. FYI, the note-taking app that's being used right now is called Explain Everything. At the moment, I'm actually going through some of the detail a little bit more in depth, just because it's easy enough to put it together, and I don't feel like I'm getting lost anywhere. So I don't really feel the need to do a big expansive coverage quite yet, but eventually when it starts becoming more complicated, I'll start broadening things out and going less in detail, and then coming back to cover more detail later on, and multiple passes if necessary of that. I'm just showing some of my chunking process here a little bit more clearly, a little bit more slowly, so that you can follow what's going on. Just remember, every time you take in new information, we're always trying to frame it in terms of understanding, why is this important? Why is this important? If we can't figure out why it's important, then we need to either Google it to figure out why it's important, or we need to think about it more, or we need to go to the next thing. So I haven't encountered anything like that quite yet, but I will soon. But reading about the accounting process right now, I'm thinking, why is the accounting process important? Which is why I've decided to structure it in this way, in terms of coming from basic accounting and then going down into the process, assuming that probably it's going to end up coming back in here, and a lot of this will have to be rearranged eventually. But always thinking about it in terms of why is this important, and not really being satisfied to move on until you answer that. Once you take in a little bit of knowledge and you're trying to put it together, always zoom back to look, how can you fit it together more? You can find other ways to fit it together. Take that time to consolidate. Time spent to simplify information is always time well spent. And that's what I'll be doing right now as well. So by chunking this based on importance, it's removed the need for this mnemonic that the student has created previously, because it's relatively straightforward to be able to remember this when it's chunked properly. If I did need to memorize the exact definition, then this would just go into a flashcard, which I would be making on the side simultaneously as I'm doing this, which for the sake of time, brevity at the moment, I'm not going to be doing, but that's relatively straightforward. It would just be something like, what does faithful representation mean? And then I just have the definition. Something as simple as that. Here's an example of something that right now, based on what I know, I don't know why this is important, accounting assumptions. And having a quick scroll through there, it doesn't actually show why it's important. It just goes through the different assumptions, so I'm not really satisfied to learn about it until I know why it's important, so I'm just going to Google about it right now and then satisfy that curiosity. As a little tip, sometimes you can get better information by searching images because people might have given presentations about this topic and it's just easier to see. So now, based on this answer, I know that the accounting assumptions are fundamental and necessary because without them, the accounting system as we know it would not work and it would therefore break down. So I'm quite curious now as to what these assumptions even are for it to have such a powerful impact. And also notice how I often will try to represent the words through not words, and this is me manipulating the information a little bit more in my mind so that it makes more sense to me and allows me to process it at a deeper level without really needing to spend more time. So it increases my level of retention on the go. So if you want to get technical about it, this is increasing the ability for encoding, and because I'm also doing it after I read it, it is allowing me to increase my practice of immediate retrieval of encoded information. I think I've explained quite a few things now, so starting from now, I'm just going to start speeding up a little bit. So don't try to follow along necessarily, just take away the key elements of what I'm trying to achieve here and the way that I'm sort of structuring and constantly going back and forth between information and zooming in and out and always building relevance, looking for ways to simplify and chunk, as well as processing the information in a different way. And again, those of you that are on the I Can Study course, which I presume is most of you, you will see that there are certain techniques that I'm using here and there as I go through this. But starting from now, I'm going to just kick the speed up a little bit, and you may feel that I'm skipping certain steps. Don't feel pressure to skip those steps as well. The only reason I'm going to skip certain steps is because I've done it tens of thousands of times, so don't feel that pressure. And just another note is that a lot of people get really hung up about the definitions, but notice that when you understand it, the definition, you can make a very accurate definition without having memorized it word for word if you really know it. So a good example here will be reporting period principle, which is defined like this on this resource, but here you can see it's defined this way in the PDF that I'm using. So both of them are correct, but it's just about getting your head around the concept, and then the definition will become easier to understand, and you can really almost create the definition out of just purely thinking about the concept and describing it rather than having memorized it, which is a lot easier. So even if you do end up memorizing it, there's a lot less to memorize. Or it's easier, at least, to recall it, because you fundamentally understand what it's about. It's not just rote learned. So again, I'm just currently, I know that the assumptions are necessary for accounting system to function. So therefore, I'm going to take these assumptions and think, okay, why are each of these assumptions important for it to allow the accounting system to work? And once I understand that, that'll allow me to chunk and create the relationships necessary. little thing that I'm doing in terms of rubbing it out before I put it back in again. It's just, again, allowing me to practice that retrieval step. And the other thing is also, because I've spent so long thinking about why it's important and how to simplify it, I just know the meaning of the word so well that I read this and I just genuinely don't think I'll ever forget what the word means, because I've just thought about it so deeply for the last, whatever, 5-10 minutes. Here's also a great example of how we can reverse certain things. There's a pattern here that comes up. So we can see that the balance sheet has assets and liabilities in either current or non-current, current being 12 months, or assets being just presumably currently holding. But this is repeating, right? You can see that this and this repeat here and here. So we can actually flip this, and instead it makes more sense to arrange it like this. So this is kind of one of those things that you'll pick up with experience. So we can actually just do it like this. It makes more sense for us to divide it by saying there's current and non-current, and then within current and non-current, you have assets and liabilities. So you see, it's just easier to see. It just makes more sense this way, to say there's current and non-current, assets and liabilities. And in fact, you probably don't even need to have the words assets and liabilities in here, really, because by this point, what else is the balance sheet going to have if it's not assets and liabilities? It's almost just so basic and obvious that it doesn't even need to be said. So I actually wouldn't even write it here. I just say current and non-current. Also, another thing is that you may think that I've been going quite slowly so far. I mean, it's been almost an hour. I've only covered this much. Having said that, I would say that I've got 100% retention of everything that I've studied so far. But I'm actually starting to feel that this topic is becoming easier and easier. Like, everything I read now is starting to click a little bit faster. And this is a snowball effect of learning, is that building a good foundation that's well connected, and you can see based on my mind map that it's reasonably well connected, that allows me to make future things much more relevant. So I'm starting to feel that it is becoming a little bit faster. Little side note here, I'm actually going to draw a connection between the word classify and understandable, because classifying information allows it to become more understandable. That's a genuine link there. However, it's also quite obvious, so I'm not entirely sure whether I want to have that there, because it's going to make my mind map messier. It's pretty obvious, so I don't think I'm going to forget it. This is one of those things that I may just chuck into a flashcard maybe and say, what are all the elements around financial reporting that allow it to become more understandable, within which one of those things may be classifying. So I've yet to decide. If it ends up being really messy, I'll figure out another way to do this. But for now, I'll just chuck the relationship there and just note that I might remove it later. And if you get tired, yeah, just take breaks. Look outside. Go for a walk or a stroll. When you cover the optimize for focus rest timing and interleaving, you'll learn a little bit more about how you can use all of those things to optimize your focus. But also, in my mind, like, I'm quite relaxed at the moment. I'm not really very tired, because I'm not wading through the information very difficultly. I'm just casually asking myself the question and trying to figure out why is it important. And because I'm just solely focused on that, it's not too difficult for me to just get through this information. It's not too difficult. Here's an example of something that I see a lot of high school students struggling with is something like this, like, memorizing, like, okay, current assets are things that will provide a benefit within the next 12 months. They include items such as cash, inventory, and accounts receivable. From my understanding, it's just any asset. And an asset is a resource that allows a economic benefit, and it's classified as current, being next 12 months. Anyway, so, and the same thing with liabilities, current liabilities, things you have to pay off within the next 12 months, and they include things like, expenses and equipment and all of this other stuff. But, what was it? Bank overdrafts, loan repayments. It's kind of just obvious. I mean, it's like anything that's going to bring you economic benefit, anything that's going to cost you money. You just almost don't have to you actually not almost, you don't have to memorize that at all, because you could be in the test and exam and it could say, what is an example of a current asset? And you'd think, what's some resource that someone could have that could bring them, economic benefit? Cash, sales, invoices that haven't been paid yet, new technology they invested in, maybe new software. What's something that's a non-current asset? Yeah, maybe some kind of like a new system that's going to take the next couple years. Like, you can just think about this sort of stuff and you'll get it marked right because it's correct information. So this is like an example of something that you can pretty much just wholly skip. And if you understand it conceptually, there's nothing really difficult about this at all. At the moment, there's something that I'm doing right now, which is I can see that there's a lot of detail in what I'm about to read, and it seems quite dry. So I'm just going to quickly skim through all of this to see what am I about to learn and how is that all going to fit in together. So a little bit of a mini skim just to look at where my learning is heading for the next 10 or so pages. And it's going to allow me to frame everything a little bit better and understand how it all fits, so that I can get to answering the question of why it's important much more early on. Again, what I'm doing right now is a little bit more of an advanced variant, because I'm not doing a full aim step for the entire topic before I've started going into this. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this may be something that is worthwhile for you to do. If you are still new to the process, if you find it difficult to do what I'm doing, which is consolidating as I go, which is genuinely more difficult, then you should definitely do the aim step for the entire thing first, and then move on to processing the information, much like how I'm processing it. But once you're used to that a little bit, you'll start being able to do what I'm doing, which is building these mind maps as I go. And you can see that even though I've covered quite a lot of information, it doesn't look that way on the page so far. As far as I know, I'm on page 17 of 55. A little bit slower than I thought I was going to be, but I feel I will still speed up. So I should be able to finish off, hopefully, all of Unit 1 and Unit 2 of accounting within these 2 hours. And still, as it is now, I would say that my retention of everything that I've read is close to 100%. And the things that I haven't, retained 100%, I know enough to figure it out, which is the important thing. Here's an example of information that I have no intention of putting on my mind map, because this is definitely something that I feel is very arbitrary detail. It's the information that should not be on a tax invoice to comply with GST requirements. I mean, even reading that sentence made me bored. So in this case, I will use a rote learning technique such as the modified method of loci or flashcards, using flashcard management techniques that we teach for this. So this would just be rote learning. I'm just gonna skip this for now though. For this, you know what? I'll memorize it. For the sake of completion, I'll memorize it. Alright, I should just quickly explain what I've been drawing for a very long time now. So this was just a demonstration of how I would use a modified method of loci as part of my mind map in order to memorize this. So tax invoice should include name. So for whatever reason, I just thought when I thought the word name, I thought it's me, Mario. So this is Mario to remind me of the name. Mario is only wearing a third of his clothing. A third of his clothing is gone because it was taken away from the tax. So that's tax invoice. He's got something attached to him, this balloon, which has an A on it, which represents the ABN. He has a tattoo, which is pre-printed for the pre-printed doc number. He's holding up a picket sign fence with a description of the goods and services coming out of a phone box, which is meant to remind me of the TARDIS or something from Doctor Who, which is like a time-traveling machine or something. I haven't actually watched Doctor Who, so I don't know if this is even the right color or what. I think it's meant to be blue, actually, so... But whatever, I mean, it's going to remind me of the date. And then the purchaser, if there's more than 1,000, then they need to have an ABN, and we've got the address here as well. And the name of the purchaser was obvious enough, as well as GST exclusive, GST amount, GST inclusive, and the total. That was also stuff that I thought was obvious enough that I don't need to include. So this is going to allow me to remember what a tax invoice should include. And even though I spent like, 20 minutes drawing this, I now no longer have to really think about this ever again, and I'll be able to remember this pretty easily for basically forever. And I'll review it maybe a couple times, but that 20 minutes is peace off my mind. It's less flashcards I need to do. It's less everything else. And once I've done it, now I can just remember it for as long as I need to. Especially if you're interested in actually pursuing accounting as probably something that you do need to know. And at a certain point, it'll become obvious. And maybe I didn't need to do it for this piece of information, but I decided to do it anyway, just for the hell of it. Anyway, back to the rest of the information. I like how in this example of accounting, the benchmarks that have been used for everything have been exactly the same every single time, but they've written it every single time as well. Probably because it was given to them every single time, but it's just like it's very simple conceptually to understand. It's just looking at past in terms of trends, future in terms of budget, and then current in terms of industry average, and it's just the same thing for every single measurement that we've done so far, but for some reason they're just writing it again and again and again. So I'm not even going to bother writing it anymore because there's just no point. Alrighty, well, we're coming to an end. Fortunately, I wasn't able to finish everything. I got to page 35 of 55, so, you know, decent little bit left. Probably I did what, one and a half units maybe. I don't know. I just don't know how big the topic is. Yep, that was the mind map that I got at the end of it. So that's I mean, it doesn't look like a ton of information on there, and it's not that clean, and it could be a lot better, but it's not bad, I think, for the amount of time that was spent on it. I would probably need another, I would say at least another probably 30 minutes to finish off all of that, Unit 1 and Unit 2. Anyway, that's kind of how it is. Hopefully you get an idea of how some of the techniques work and interact with each other, and you've got a better understanding of how you can use these techniques. Feel free to watch this again if you need to. Follow along. Try to keep up with the way that I go back and forth and zoom in and out. And again, I'll just reiterate that this is not a technique that is necessarily easy to do. However, it's also not that difficult either. So if you're struggling with the hip shot variant that I used just now, then I would suggest that you look at the Ascent 1, Ascent 2, and just really break it into your aim, shoot, and skin steps, because you will find it very easy to do this when you get used to it, but in the initial stages, it can be understandably quite confusing and difficult.